In this video, we're going to continue our discussion of the list view control. In particular, we're going to look at a more real-world example of how to retrieve data from a database and create a list view item for each record that's returned from the database. We'll also create sub-items or columns to reflect the columns that are returned from the database as well. And we'll look at keeping the database data in sync with changes to the list view items. We're going to allow the user to edit the labels for each of the list view items and have those be able to save back into the underlying data store. We're also going to look at grouping the list view items near the end of this video. So let's get started by running the little example that we created, and as we execute it, you'll notice that at least at first glance, there's not a whole lot different from what we did in the previous video. After all, we're able to create list view items. We're able to create them with multiple columns. But really where the magic is behind the scenes. We're pulling that data from a database that you can see here in our Solution Explorer called example.mdf. Let's take a look at our example.mdf database in a little more detail. It has one table that we're calling report, and it has a number of columns: report ID, report name, author, a graphic ID, and this is going to correspond with one of the images in the image list control, a report date, and a report group. And we'll use this grouping later on in the video to kind of show a different view of the details view that allows us to group similar items together. So we'll just keep that. And I added some sample data. So let's go ahead and take a look at the table data for the report table. And as you'll notice, here are the report names that we saw just a moment ago whenever we ran our application, the authors, the report dates, and some additional information like the graphic ID and the report group. Like I said, we'll use in just a few moments here. So let's take a look at the code that we used to create this example. We'll start off in the form load event where we create our columns. So we're using that shortcut method of creating our columns, the report column, author column, report date. Recall from the previous video that we're setting the size and the alignment for each of these columns. We set the default view to details. And we're going to set two additional properties, one called allow column reorder. Let's go ahead and run the application and test and see how that works. Let's go ahead and hold our mouse button down as we push on the report date and move it before the author column. So you can see that we're able to do that now by enabling this property within our list view. Additionally, we're going to allow the editing of a label, and we'll use this in just a few moments. But let's concentrate on what this populate data button did. We're essentially just going out and filling up a data set that we've created that's based on the example.mdf file and the report table in that database. So we're going to fill up the report data table of our example data set using this report table adapter .fill method. Now you may know from your previous experience with the table adapter that this is the object that's responsible for communicating between the data set and the underlying data store. It knows how to retrieve data from the data store and then insert or update or delete data back into the data store based on the changes that were made into the data set. The next line of code, we're simply clearing out all the existing items in the list view, and we're going to call the begin update method, which you'll recall just pauses all the updating that the list view might be ready to do for us. We're going to pause that until the very end of the changes that we make to the list view control, where we'll tell it, okay, go ahead and update yourself now using the end update method. And now it's just a matter of looping through each of the rows that we've retrieved from our report table in our database that now we have temporarily stored in the report data table of our data set. So we're going to go through each of the rows, and for each report row that we find, we'll create a new list view item to correspond with it. And then we'll just simply populate each of the properties of our new list view item with values from the row that we're currently working with from our data table. So we'll set the text property as the first column to the report name. We'll set the second column as a sub-item .add to the author, the third column to the report date. We'll set the image that's displayed next to the list view item by setting it to the graphic ID from our database. And then once we finish populating all the properties of our new list view item, we'll add it to the items collection of our list view control. Now the one property that I kind of glossed over was the tag property, and you can do anything you want to with the tag property. You can put any piece of information you want to in there. I chose to put the primary key value from each row, in other words the report ID, something that uniquely identifies this row, in the tag. It won't be visible to the user of my application, but whenever we go to make an edit within our application of one of the list view items, as we're going to demonstrate here in just a moment, then I can tie it back to a row in my data table, and then it can tie it back to the underlying data store, all because we all are using the same primary key, which is report ID. So that explains how we were able to retrieve data from a database and then create list view items. But let's talk about another feature of this example that allows us to enable editing for each of these items. So if a user were to right click, for example, on configuration support and click edit, notice that we're now in edit mode for this particular item. I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard to kind of move around. I can type in another word here and hit enter on my keyboard, and we'll stop the application and run it again to see if that information was actually persisted back to the database. And as you can see, the change that I made was persisted. So let's take a look at how we were able to accomplish this. One of the first things that you'll need to do if you're kind of following along and trying to do this on your own is to make sure to select your database in the Solution Explorer and change the copy to output directory to copy if newer. By default, it'll be set to copy always, and if that's the case, then your database will never appear like it's been updated. So you'll need to change this to copy if newer. But that's the only thing you should need to change in order to follow along with this example. But let's take a look at what we were able to do. First of all, I have a context menu strip called Sample Context Menu Strip, and it has a single menu item called Edit. And we associated that context menu strip with our list view by going to the context menu strip property and setting it to our instance of our sample context menu strip. So that's the first step to at least getting the edit to work. Now let's take a look at that edit handler and see what we did there. We're trying to get a reference to the item that was actually selected, so we'll create a new list view item and set it equal to the focused item from our sample list view. So now we have the item that currently has the focus, and we'll call a method on it called begin_edit. This is the method that puts the list view item into edit mode. Now we'll want to find an event that we can capture that lets us know when the user is finished editing. So let's take a look at the events for our list view. And as you can see, we're going to scroll up here to after label edit. We'll handle that event in the sample list view underscore after label edit method. So at a high level, we need to retrieve the new value, we need to update the data set, and then update the database based on the new value in the data set. So that's what we're going to do here. First of all, we need to find which item needs to be updated. So we're able to use this label edit event args E to determine which item has been updated, and we'll use that to get a reference to the item within our list view control. And we'll need that reference to find out what the new value of that list view item should be. Next, what we need to do is find the report row in our data set that corresponds to the edited list view item. So that's what we're doing in these two lines of code. We're going to create a new report row, which is a strongly typed data row. And then we're going to use my example dataset dot report. So the report data table has a strongly typed method called find report by ID. And this is where our tag property comes in. Recall that we stored the report ID in the tag property of each list view item. So now we're going to need that report ID to find the row that we want to update within the data set. So after casting that to an int, we're able to get a reference to the row that we need to update, and the value we want to change is the report name. That's the column that we want to change, and we're going to set that equal to e.label. So the item that was updated, give me its new value. Once we get that, then we'll put that into our report name and then tell our table adapter that we have updates. So we'll call the update method, passing in the report data row from our example data set. Now here I'm not checking how many rows were affected. We may want to, in a more full-fledged example, check to make sure that one row was indeed updated. We may even want to give some feedback to the user to let them know that the update was completed successfully. Now there's one little bit of information here. Notice that we've only really allowed the update of the label itself, or rather the first column of data. Unfortunately, using the list view control, that's the only bit of information that we can allow the user to update. So they can't update or even select the other columns of data. If you need that functionality, you may want to turn to one of the grid controls instead. Okay, so the final bit of functionality that I want to enable is grouping the values together. Now, as you recall, we kind of glossed over some of this. I'm going to uncomment out this line of code which sets the group property of the individual list view items that are being created whenever you click the populate data button _click event. So we're in that for each where we're going through each row of data from the database that's currently stored in the report data table and creating a new list view item for each row. Well, here we're going to assign it to one of the groups that are contained within the sample list view control. So we have to pass this in as a key so that it can locate one of the groups in the groups collection of our list view control. Now, where do we declare those groups at? Well, we have some code that we need to comment to uncomment. And here's where we create the groups. Again, the first value in the add method is the key. This is how we'll programmatically access this particular group of the groups collection. And then this is the value that will be visible. So let's see what this does now to our example. Notice that all of our values are now grouped by either executive report, general report, or configuration document. So that about does it for our review of the list view control. To conclude, the list view control facilitates the display of data in ways that allow the user to quickly scan and visually differentiate the type of data that's represented graphically, and it can be used in a number of applications where you need to allow the user to sift through and reorganize the data to suit his or her preferences.